Hello, everyone. Welcome to My Black is Transnational. And I have on here our guest for today. Joining us, and waiting to hear this particular perspective. Good friend of mine representing Tanzania, or Tanzania. Shubi Bocko. Before I have Shubi introduce herself, I just want to give a quick, heads up. Shubi has been one of the people who's been really repping and pushing for refugee and immigrant health. That's just her background all the way through. Currently working with refugee services and programs right now for Jewish United Funds, but also working with the Illinois Department of Public Health and the Illinois Refugee Health Program. That's how I actually got to meet Shubi, and it's just been good things from then on. And I was very excited about her story, and I really wanted to be able to have her share her story. Wish you could have brought your sister too, but to be able to really have that convo. But I'm looking forward to doing that in the future. But so we have on the show Shubi Bocko, and thank you, Shubi, for coming through. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's a little chilly this weekend, but all is well. And
Yeah.
thank you for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure. So, like I said, I'll give a brief introduction to you, but I also wanted you to take a moment, talk a little bit about yourself, your culture, like anything you want the audience to kind of know about you from an African standpoint.
Yeah, so as I was introduced earlier, my name is Shubira Bocko, but I prefer to be called Shubi. And I was born in Tanzania, East Africa. I moved here in the city of Chicago with my family when I was 9 years old. So I've been here for some time. And growing up in Chicago has so many, like I had so many good experiences. I always describe my experience growing up in Chicago as growing up in a Tanzanian home, but in Chicago. So I had like different upbringings. I grew up in a typical Tanzanian home. So where mom would cook like Tanzanian food, we had like Tanzanian culturally well represented in our home, from like the decorations to like the Tanzanian flag to everything that you could think of, even Tanzanian music. So that in short, I grew up like in a very Tanzanian home. Not just that, but my parents also spoke Kiswahili, or our tribal language, which is called Kihaya.
Mm.
So as I gotten older, I really appreciate my parents, like even speaking those languages in our home, because it really helped ground my culture and help me preserve our culture. In addition to that, I also grew up in Chicago, which is the other perspective. So I grew up on the far south side of Chicago, and growing up there was a good experience. It was a predominantly African American community, so I would describe as growing up with the African American experience. Like I remember growing up, we'll play double dutch,
Yeah.
eat nachos and cheese, wear K-Swiss,
Okay,
just like
Swiss. You already started, Shubi. You've already started. K Swiss.
yeah, K-Swiss, like jersey dresses and taking the train to school. I went to school in Hyde Park as well, like
Okay.
elementary school and high school.
Yeah.
So I had a very Tanzanian mixed with African American upbringing. I also recall like celebrating Black History at school, even at our churches, participating in Kwanzaa celebrations, and then going to the Babylonian parade as well. So I had a very unique upbringing where at home it was like traditional Tanzanian culture, but in the larger community that I grew up, it was like an African American culture. So I grew up with both cultures, and I really appreciate that because they shape how I interact with the world and how I navigate this very complex and very interesting world. So that was in short my upbringing. It was full of fun memories where on one side in my home I had the Tanzanian culture, but in the larger community I had like the African American culture as well. So it was great. Even growing up, I didn't really think that was like abnormal. Not abnormal, but I didn't think that was my normal.
Right.
But as I gotten older, there were certain things that were said to me that kind of had to make me think like, oh, okay, this is not everybody else's norm.
Yeah.
I remember even growing up in school, there were times where people would be like, "Oh, you are black, but you're not black black." I was like, "I'm not black black. what does that mean?
Yeah.
So as a child, I couldn't really make sense of that, but as I think as I gotten older, it started to like make sense what they meant by that. And then on my Tanzanian side, when I would visit Tanzania, like my relatives back on the continent, it was always this notion that, oh, you're not Tanzanian enough because you've lived outside of the Tanzania for such a long time. There's just certain cultural aspect that you're not able to fully participate in. So I grew up in this really interesting world where as a kid I thought that was normal, but as I got older and came to reality sunk in that maybe that wasn't the norm for other people. And so it was quite interesting learning how to navigate that as an adult. So that was in short like my upbringing. I know that was a lot, but I think
No,
it
no. Yeah, I mean, you covered a lot in things that I was going to try to pull from you. So I'm glad you gave it so we can really go deeper into some other areas regarding that. But first, I want to kind of go back to what you mentioned in terms of growing up on the South Side, right?
yeah.
In especially going to school in the Hyde Park area, bringing up some of the things that are very nostalgic in terms of I mean, just even the K Swiss, the Cheetos and cheese, or Doritos and cheese, nacho cheese, going from the corner store, taking the train. Like that was my experience, as well. But my school was all the way in the north side, so I took the red line all the way up north. But one of the things that was interesting, is that for me coming up, didn't see that many East Africans, right? And so the interaction was mostly West Africans for me. And I mean, when I first came, we came around the same age. I was just turning 8. You said around 9. So for me, I started up in Uptown, and then we moved to the South Side. By the time I was in like high school, getting ready for high school for sure. But the community in which we surrounded ourselves with, it seems a little different. So I wanted to know, like, where were your supporting, Tanzanian community members that your parents were able to lean on to be able to get that support, and for you to be able to continue to get that exposure to, the culture, and be able to kind of help preserve it. Were there people around? Because y'all are low key if that's the case. Like, I did not see y'all
Yeah.
at all.
East Africans, specifically Tanzanians, we tend to be a little bit more like laid back and low key. So, but we were out here. When my family first moved here, we moved in Hyde Park, and there was like a couple other Tanzanian families. So we kind of created like a Tanzanian hub because we both came from like the same country,
Mhm.
similar culture, language, where they would show support to each other and would call each other, kind of help with the integration process. And out of that, some of like our community members right now, they form what we call the Tanzanian Community Association of the Midwest, which is actually an established nonprofit organization here in the state of Illinois. And that came out of that just wanting to connect with other Tanzanians and support each other due to like share experiences. So through that, we were able to connect with other families, even families coming from nearby states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and so forth. And we would have like Tanzania Independence celebration. If someone was having either like a baby shower, baptism, graduation, we will let each other know as like Tanzanians, and we'll, attend those different celebrations. And I really appreciated having that space because that helped in preserving the culture. Not
Mhm.
just that, but even for families that were still new to this country, was still trying to learn how to navigate this country. They felt like there was a support system that they could tap into who understood their experience. You know what I mean? So the Tanzanian Community Association was one of the ways that my family was able to, get that support. Not just that, but we also started, and my father was pretty um, key in helping establish like Swahili church services here in the city of
Mhm.
Chicago, and we actually have like a Tumaini Swahili chapel church
Mhm.
where we'll have Swahili conducted services and fellowship. And as Tanzanian, faith is such like a huge part of our
Yeah.
culture and our experience. So that was another way where we could connect with other Tanzanian families who also had children around our age. So as like the our parents connected, we'll have like find our own space to like play and get to know other Tanzanian children. So those were some of like the support systems that we had as Tanzanians. And like you mentioned, maybe some people might not have heard that we are around in the city of Chicago because we tend to be a little bit more low key.
Yeah, yeah. Y'all
That's
are definitely low key. It's it's like because I'm just like you were at Hyde Park, like it's not
yeah.
like where like we're in Hyde Park, but no, that's so interesting. And I think it's one of the things you brought up as far as even faith, right? Everything that you're describing, I always find it very fascinating when I have, and this is why I really wanted to have a conversation with you because it's even though we, West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, Central, whatever, the lives we live as immigrants, especially from a transnational standpoint, even in talking about what you're describing as these like hometown associations where we're here and we're preserving our culture, and parents are connecting to help find a way to, retain and continue to stay connected. But then the kids are also connecting and trying to find ways to be able to continue to just like support each other, commiserate, like complain, like you had somebody that can understand you, like, like my mom didn't want me to do this, and it's like, oh, my mom doesn't want us to do this either, like, or whatever the case may be. But you're able to kind of find that and build community, and then over time, you, as you mentioned, you either grow an appreciation of it or you try to find a way to distance yourself from it. But yeah, it's interesting because it's very similar, and it's always like grounded through church, or it's grounded through social organization at like TCA that you just mentioned. So like I wonder though, what was the perspective? And did you all have a similar type of relationship with fellow Eastern African countries? Like here in West Africa, I mean, I shouldn't say we're not in West Africa, but like for West Africans here in Chicagoland, right? It was like, oh, the Nigerians and the Ghanaians link up, right? And it's always us too, and we can always battle by Jalo. And then Sierra Leoneans come in from time to time, right? And Cameroonians come in from time to time, but we all have these little, West African hubs that were able to kind of cross culturally compare notes. Whereas, is that something similar? Because like with Kenya, people who are, from Kenya or similar countries, do you have that type of interaction as well, or is it just strictly Tanzanian people doing Tanzanian things?
I think growing up that was more prevalent as I remember when we had our Tanzania Independence Day celebration. We used to invite other East African communities like the Kenyan community, the Ugandan community, and other East African countries, and they will also do the same with us as well. Like they will invite us to their events, and I think there was even a time when they will have like soccer matches,
Oh,
which can get pretty intense because
yeah.
soccer is such a huge part of like the African culture. The international community at large. So those used to happen. I'm not sure what happened. I haven't seen those occur like they used to in the past, but it's something that we here at the Tanzanian Community Association we want to do more of. We do see some Kenyans or even Ugandans coming to our events. Like we had barbecue events over the summer and they were present. So I think post COVID, we want to see more of that. And as the Tanzania Community Association, we definitely will try to do more of that outreach. But yeah, we used to do events together, like I mentioned, soccer games, uh, events like Independence Day events, or other celebrations that happen in our communities.
Mm. So how did you used to balance your identities? Like growing up in the African American world when you're outside of the home, but then or the black, black culture overall, but then coming back home knowing that you're in an African household and maybe speaking a language. Like was that something that you were able to do well? Did you struggle? What was your parents' perspective on the African American culture? Like what was that growing up for you?
Yeah, I think having the Tanzanian culture, African culture at home, and then having the African American culture outside the home was really crucial. As I mentioned earlier, like my parents were pretty proud to be Tanzanians. Like even if you enter a home, we had Tanzanian flags, we had like African decorations, you name it, we had it. It was almost like entering an African shop. which I appreciate it. So with that, and then my dad was a pastor, and he was a pastor at an African American church.
Okay.
And I think with him being a pastor at a predominantly African American church, I think that play a key role in helping us balance the two cultures. Because I remember even during the Black History Month, we would have like a table of like explaining West Tanzania and Tanzanian culture. And we also had like a table explain like the African American culture, important African American figures, and etc. So I think that really helped out in helping me balancing that. But like I mentioned earlier, there were times where I would come across people who tell me, "You're not black, black," and that made me question, like, okay, so what does it mean to be black, black? And that kind of caused like I want to say identity crisis
Mm,
because I feel like the same communities that I grew up in, there were people that were questioning or whether or not I was black or not. So that led to a lot of questioning, like, okay, so I'm not black, black, then what am I?
right. Right.
And what constitutes as being black, black? Like, is it the fact that I wasn't born in the U.S. make me not black, black, or because I don't have like generations of family here, I'm not considered black, black? So that led to a lot of questions on one wondering what it meant to be black, black, or what I had to do to be considered black, black. Because like as as far as I was concerned, I had melanin skin. I enjoy soul food and African food. I enjoy attending like African festival. Like I was pretty black, black in my mind.
Listen. I'm just gonna be real with you. Like this is hilarious when you're like black. I'm titling this episode "Black Black."
So when you're in a situation where you feel like you have these all these black experiences and people are questioning on whether you're on whether or not you're black,
Mm,
that puts you in a very that just led to a lot of questions. In terms of my parents coming up in an African home, they were pretty embracing of our cultures, our black experiences, but they to them because they came here as after already having a full Tanzania identity, I
mm,
feel like for them they were more connected to Tanzania more than I was. Not saying I was disconnected, but they had such like a strong Tanzanian identity,
yeah.
uh, more so than I had because I had both like the Tanzanian and the African American experience.
Mhm.
But they were pretty embracing of the African American culture, church, uh, community, and I just never grew up with hearing like negative connotation or negative comments made about the African American community.
Mm,
These are the same people that welcomed us to the U.S. They were so embracing of us. They opened up their church.
mm,
They celebrated Tanzanian culture and recognized like how Swahili, like our Tanzanian language, play a huge part or role in the Kwanzaa celebration.
yeah. Yeah.
Even the principles. And then we had people in our church who were African American who went to visit Tanzania, and so I think even that helped in fostering connection and fostering a really good relationship.
Mhm.
And I really appreciated like growing up in those environments. So I overall had like a really good experience. It was just being my blackness being questioned that led me to like second guess myself. Like, okay, I'm not black. Then what am I? Um, yeah.
Yeah, so I think all right, we'll shift gears just a little bit in terms of just thinking about okay, growing up on the south side of Chicago and thinking about the cultural experiences. Your experience, what you described, is definitely not what I commonly hear, which is not a bad thing. But I think, and that's why I like again, I love hearing a perspective from the different parts of African countries or immigrants from different parts of Africa, because for many from the West, it was very similar to, well, I didn't get received that way by African Americans. We had gotten, or Black people overall, made fun of. We were this, we were that, right? And even though people like, questioned our blackness, they still felt like they had these preconceived notions about where Africans were from and these huts and villages and things like that. But now for you, growing up, you were, the usual African experience is that parents have expectations for you to be successful academically or education wise, right? And I know that you ended up going and getting your degree in psychology and sociology and at DePaul, right? And so what, you weren't expected to be a doctor? Like you weren't expected to be
So
an engineer? Like what happened? How did that go?
I was expected to get my PhD.
Okay.
That's like huge. Still expected. So,
Okay.
like you mentioned, similar to other African parents, that was also the expectation for me as well. Like a B plus or like a 90, lower than 95 is like, what happened here? Did you not study? What did we go wrong? Why didn't we get 100? So that was there, and it's still there till right now. But you know what? As I got older and reflected, I think it was just my parents saying that we expect more of you, and we made the sacrifice to come here to leave everything behind, like our career, our family and friends, so that you can have a better life. When I was in it, or when I was young, I didn't see it from that perspective until I got older. So until this day, I'm very appreciative of my parents for having such a high expectation for me, because I think they have helped me get to where I am right now. We still have those expectations until, like, they just never stop. But I think, where are the children? Why aren't you married?
Early. Oh my God. Are you the oldest?
Now I'm the third.
Oh, you're the third. Okay. Ooh, well, we need to find the oldest and talk to them too and see.
Maybe it might be a different case with them,
Oh,
but definitely for us, a PhD was almost like a requirement. Like,
mm,
so my dad has his PhD, and he was like, okay. So I got the PhD, so I'm kind of like making a way for other folks, my children, to get a PhD as well. So I don't have any plans to get a PhD right now, but who knows, that can change in the future. But again, I think it was just setting high expectation for their children and wanting them to go far and beyond, even do better than they did, which I
mhm.
appreciate as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to mention what you said about maybe other Africans having a different experience from what I had when we first moved to this country. Like, the community that welcomed us and that we lived among was African Americans. I'm not sure if that's how was the experience with other Africans. So we were like living close proximity with them. We had opportunities to learn about each other's culture, and that was fostered through church.
Mm,
People had an opportunity to ask questions, and those questions did come up, like, oh, how is Africa? Can you tell me more about Tanzania? How is the food? So we had those opportunities to educate each other about each other's culture. Even at church, I remember during Black History, or even during Kwanzaa. I remember when I was an African kid, Tanzanian kid, somebody said Happy Kwanzaa to me, and I was a little confused because I really didn't know like what to say, and I wasn't well educated on what Kwanzaa was.
yeah.
But I remember there was a time in my church where people actually took the time to educate us about what Kwanzaa was, what's important.
Mm,
So we had those opportunities as like African family and the African community to have a space to learn about each other's cultures, about each other's traditions, and kind of like dispel those myths. And
mm,
I'm not sure if that's always the case with the other African African Africans at large. And not just that, but I also went to schools in Hyde Park, and it was predominantly African American students, so few African students, and Black history was huge. I remember even doing plays, learning how to sing spirituals, and we had a teacher. She was a music teacher. She was pretty strict about learning the spirituals and what they meant and why they were sung. So I felt like just having that knowledge and having an opportunity to, it was more. I feel like I had more, so I learned more so about the African American history, but not too many people got to learn about the Tanzanian side unless we were in those church spaces.
Right.
So I think what really helped uh, me have more like a positive experiences because we had learning opportunities and we were able to have dialogue about some of our differences. Some people in the community would ask tough questions, like, bring up things about slavery, like why did our fellow African brothers and sisters sell us into slavery? So we had these tough conversations way before they were brought to the mainstream. And I think that's what made our experience a little bit unique.
Yeah.
Um, but I do want to recognize that there are some people that do not have the experience, or they have the extreme opposite, where there's words that I exchange that are hurtful to both sides. And I think creating a space for dialogue and understanding each other is what really helped me and my family. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good model, and you all were fortunate to have that model. And that is a model that I hope to continue to kind of work towards creating, because there is room for being able to just have those conversations, to be able to see where the commonalities and differences are. And even as you were discussing your experience growing up, as far as with Kwanzaa, like at least you got to learn it a little bit earlier. The idea, the concept of Kwanzaa didn't really register for me for a very long time. Maybe probably right before I got to college. And even in college is probably where it really took the time to go and sit down and learn about it and look it up and understand what it meant. And that for someone who's African, I think and I think there's some people who ignorantly would look at it and say, well, are you appropriating our culture? Like, what is going on? You're trying to steal from, and there were lots of like little, voices saying those things, or in my community, but that was something that we never got exposed to unless you decided to go out and talk to someone or read about it. And so there's so many gaps that need to be addressed, that we need to create the space for those types of conversations. But it definitely is good to learn that you had that experience, and that was something that was happening way back then, right? Like, not, it wasn't something that is foreign. So that's encouraging, at least for the future, to know that there's more room for us to be able to have those conversations and kind of bridge those gaps in the future. So what led you in it? What led you to kind of delve into refugee health and refugee work, and like what led you to that field?
I think number one for me, being an immigrant myself and just understanding like the immigrant experience, how challenging it can be to move to a new country, start over, learn a new culture, learn just new everything. That's what led me to this. And I actually started working in refugee and immigrant services in like Chicago public schools.
Mm,
Because I remember being that immigrant kid that was across these different cultures and trying to find my space. Like, who am I? And having all these questions. So in the schools, I was able to pull students out and even read to them stories about immigrant experiences. And I could see like their eyes lighting up. I remember one time I read them like a children's book about former President Obama, and they
mm,
just was so curious. They had so many questions. They was like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that his father was from Kenya." So I think my own experience as being an immigrant and just understanding how challenging and also rewarding it can be to be an immigrant, and some of the disparities that exist in providing services to immigrants due to like either language barrier or other challenges, that led me to want to do more. And not only that, but I have a background in international public service,
mm,
and for me to be able to utilize this degree, I need to at least go abroad.
yeah.
And I don't think I was ready to go back abroad again, so I wanted to use my degree here. And I think the closest field to that would be like immigrant and refugee services. It has been a very rewarding space to be in. Of course, it has its challenges, but so far I've enjoyed. I've been in here in this field for, I want to say, going on to 6 years now.
Mm,
So it's been a really rewarding experience. I think there's still a lot more advocacy to be done when it comes to like African And African refugees and immigrants, I think we're still not seen like the other immigrants. Our experiences and stories are still not amplified enough on both a local, state, and a national level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that I hope to do in my role is change that or bring some attention to that. And I think I was able to do that last year when I invited you to come and speak to the Illinois Department of Public Health, because I saw like the disparities, how our experiences are often not really put forward. Um, and yeah, I want to change that or be part of the process of changing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because our stories do matter. We have been here for some time, not some time, decades, and we are contributing to society, the economy. Not just that, but we are also contributing to the overall Black America population. We are educated. We are spending our dollars in businesses. So I feel like we need to, like, our experiences need to be told more. That's changing a little bit, but I think the pace needs to pick up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, because we've been here for decades. I mean, I've been here for, over 25 years. And I feel like my identity is more here. Not saying that I'm totally like disregarding my Tanzania identity. It's there and I embrace it. But I think when I look at my identity and where I grew up, where I went to school, I feel like my America or Chicago shaped my identity a lot more because I've been here a lot longer than I've been in Tanzania, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, because of that, I think our stories need to be told more, and I think we need to come out of our communities and share our stories, talk about the challenges that we go through, and not just that, but also talk about our differences. And we cannot do that without including our African American brothers and sisters. I always say this, and I've heard you say this before, they have paved a way for us to be here,
Oh
like
yeah.
not just us but other immigrants as well. If you look at the history of immigration,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the laws, policies were inspired or came out of the civil rights movement. So I think it's really crucial to always remember and be appreciative of our brothers and sisters of African descent and the role that they have played to make it possible for those of us who come from other parts of the world to be able to be here. And I think more dialogues need to happen between us as community members on how we could sort of like bridge that gap
Yeah.
and how we could be more appreciative of folks that made a way for those of us that are here now.
Yeah.
Um, and I try to do that in my position. I think I could do a lot more of it. Um, But again, that was the norm for me growing up. Like those conversations were being had. We have folks go back to Tanzania. Some people even got a name, African name, which they were so proud of.
Yeah. And they should be.
Or we'll bring like African fabric for folks, and they were just like so grateful. I used to love Black History Month. Like every single Sunday at our church, people wear African traditional clothing. Like everybody, like us, African American community, it was just like one big family. So um, I really did appreciate having that experience growing up. And oftentimes when I hear people like saying that they didn't have that experience growing up, I'm very appreciative of it. I'm like, what people are trying to do right now, like you mentioned earlier, we've been doing it like in the late 1990s and early 2000s.
Mhm.
Like that was just the norm.
Yeah.
To the point where people like you guys are family, like your family. Let's have like a Tanzanian feast and like a soul food are mixed together on the same
Oh
table. Like
my goodness.
dig in, like okay, like I literally grew up eating soul food and like Tanzanian food. Like I grew up with that.
I mean, you all were ahead of your time.
We were.
You
I was
were. You all were ahead of your time.
sometimes I do sit down and think back, like we were really ahead of our time,
We're ahead of your
like
time.
literally. So
Yeah.
even like when the George Floyd situation happened, and people like, oh, we were never taught African American history, we didn't know all these things happened. And I was like, I was being taught that history like in the early 90s. I
Mhm.
mean, the late 90s, early 2000s. Like we grew up with Dr. Martin Luther King Street in Chicago.
Mhm.
We had the Sabo Museum. We learned about Kwanzaa. We learned about Rosa Parks and all these other things, Juneteenth. So it was like an awakening when I realized that was not the experience of other people, and I wish it was. And I think that's changing. I'm hopeful that things will continue to change. As we could see on social media, we have more people that are going back on the African continent. They're buying land, which is great.
Mhm.
Um, People are reconnecting back to the motherland. There are conversations being had. There's intermarriage that's happening,
Mhm.
which is great. Podcasts that are happening to have these type of conversations, forums. So I'm excited, like what the next 5 to 10 years is going to look like for people of African descent, Africans. I'm just like really excited. And I think people like myself or people who have similar experience in both cultures, we're going to play a critical role in kind of like helping bridge those gaps that exist
Yes.
and
Yes.
changing the narrative. And I'm beyond excited. Like I'm like, let's go, let's have these conversations going. Let's talk about hair. Let's bring it out to the table. If you're hurt, let me know how you're hurt. If I say something to you that just hurt your feelings, tell me about it.
We're
If
through
you
it.
if you want an African name, let's talk about this. Like,
Get it. Yeah. Yeah.
like let's go. Like I'm excited.
Yeah. No,
I
I mean, Shubi, you are speaking to my soul on like on a deep level in terms of just everything you're describing is everything that I'm aspiring to do. We have all, I mean, we're on the same wavelength in that regard because I've dubbed this decade. I jokingly, but actually not jokingly, but I do dub this decade the transnational 20s, right? And that's what I've called it since 2020 is because I think there is a not a renaissance, but there is an awakening that
yeah
is happening where people do want to go back home. People want to learn more about back home. People, the idea of being African is no longer just a fetish. It's no longer just a phase. It is something that people do want to embrace. People do want to learn about. And we, as you mentioned, the ones who've had the luxury of being able to, and the transnationals, especially for us, the 1.5ers who were born at a young age and came here at a young age and got to really experience, the benefit of being in America, but also got the benefit of being raised and being heavily enculturated in our rooted culture, and we still remember home and we still go home. We are essentially going to be the navigators. We are the ones that can help guide and kind of shift and help those who want to reconnect back home to that. So it's really cool to be able to get that. And I'm very excited to be able to let's put it all on the table. Let's just talk. Like because I think to me, for someone like you who had that opportunity, like that ability, I want us to have reconciliation. And in order for us to reconcile as a family, as a community, as a group, culture, population, whatever word you want to use, for us to do that, we have to come to the table and put everything on the table and say, hey, let's talk about this. You know what I'm saying? Like this is where I feel, went wrong. This is what I feel is right. This is what I think about your culture, blah, blah, blah. We need to have those conversations. Those conversations need to happen, not just African American, but even like intra Africa, intra Black, like East African, West African, the MENA population, like the people from Egypt, and like a lot of them don't even feel like they're part of the conversation. I've had conversations with people who are from that Middle East and North Africa. For those who are asking what MENA is, right? A lot of them don't even feel like they're part of the conversation when we talk about Africa. Some sent people from Congo, like we all need to have these conversations about what's happening, what are our experiences here in the US, and abroad in the diaspora, and what can we do to be able to continue to reconnect and build and help home, but also continue to build here in the States where we spent most of our lives, especially us. We've spent more years here than over there. And so everything that you're saying is just even more like it's more fuel to my fire to be able to continue to do these things because it's very important. Our stories need to be told. Our stories are important. And as I've been saying in many different presentations or different talks, like I even with ID, we're here. Like Africans are here. Like when we're contributing to society, we're contributing to pop culture, all the cool things, all the things that everybody's promoting and marketing and business and entertainment and all. We all have our handprints in that now, right? There's some way, shape, or form somebody that's involved in something that you like is probably a second gen or a younger child of an African immigrant or a black immigrant in some way, shape, or form. And so the experiences are becoming more validated because people are now going and they're not hiding it anymore. There are people who, like, I'm not saying that I did, but there are people who, for example, could code switch and can mask their accent and they can change their name or use their nickname or whatever the case may be, and they can blend in and not have to say anything. But a lot of them now, like I've seen that happen a lot, where like a lot of athletes are, maybe at the beginning of their, playing career, a lot of them may have said that my name is, James eBay Lamberts or whatever, and then by the time they get this awakening, they start to feel more confident and see that collective support from other areas. They say, oh no, my name is Kalechi and I want to use Kalechi, right, instead of James, even though my name is not James at all, but like still, right, just thinking about that. And so I'm with you 100% in hoping that these things, we can make these things really come to fruition just across the board. But enough about my soapbox. The so you talked about going back in international services, and so I want to know, like, did you? I think you may have told it once, like you did Peace Corps, like did you? I remember we talked about that a little bit, but or came across that info, but you did it back home because I was gonna initially ask you like how often did you go back home, like those type of things. But I'm curious about this, like what was that like coming back home under this like under this hat, like this company or not company, but under this mission, I should say, with Peace Corps. What was that like?
Yeah, it was. I had mixed views about it in the beginning. I think because I have lived here for such a long time. I was a Tanzanian in the U.S., but I wasn't a Tanzanian in Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is that when I went back, because I have been here for such a long time, there are certain things that I don't want to say I've forgotten, but I just maybe have did differently. That when I went back, people started questioning like are you from other countries nearby or uh almost kind of like revoke me being Tanzanian, and I'm like, what? I was born here, spent 9 years of my life in Tanzania. So that was really interesting. It caused like identity crisis, I want to say, where I started again question similar to you're not black. I started questioning my Tanzanian identity, like maybe I'm not, maybe I am. And in Tanzanian culture, the Tanzanian country, a lot of friendship are formulated during like high school,
Mm.
where people go to boarding school. They
Yes.
have like these traditions that they do, pranks. They just
Yes.
become really. And I was around people that were my age who were talking about these experiences, and I couldn't relate.
Yeah.
I was like, while they were having this experience, I was living on the south side of Chicago, going to pep rallies, taking the train to school, going to football games, prom. Like, that was my experience. So I was like, maybe because I didn't have the high school experience in Tanzania or people formulate these friendships, maybe I'm not Tanzanian.
Mm.
So it was like a back and forth of really trying to figure like where is my Tanzania identity? Like where is it? Like it took a good it took a good year,
Mm.
and I think I had to accept the fact that I was born in Tanzania, spent 9 years of my life, but after that I moved to the U.S. So a lot of like my identity formation happened in the U.S.
Yeah.
and I had to accept that. And I think once I accepted that, I came to the realization like, hey, although I cannot be their version of being a Tanzanian, which is having been born there, went to elementary school, high school, etc., does make me a less of a Tanzanian. It's just that my version of being a Tanzanian is different from theirs, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It took some years to get there. It was like a lot of internal battles to the
Right.
point where I was like, what do I have to do
Yeah.
to fully be accepted to being
Yeah.
a Tanzanian?
Yeah.
And then it just came down to like I would never have the experience like with high school. My experience with that high school was in the United States. So I had to come to full terms with that and accept it.
Yeah.
And after that, I came up with this idea that being a Tanzanian, it almost fall on a spectrum where my parents, who fully have like a Tanzanian identity, they grew up there. They were born there, grew up there, went to did their schooling, career, like the first career happened there. So they have like a strong Tanzanian identity.
Mm.
And my Tanzanian identity will never be able to match my parents' identity. And that's okay.
Right.
That's okay. So it took some time to like unpack all of that, understand it for me to get here. So I am a Tanzanian who grew up in Chicago and have some Chicago experiences, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So I embrace both sides. That's why I talked about being a Tanzanian at home and then embracing like the African American culture as well, because that's what I grew up with. I didn't grow up like people my age did back on the continent where they had like these really unique experiences. And it was fun to hear them. I was like, that was not my experience at all.
Yeah.
It
Can't
wasn't.
relate. It's the same. I mean, it's just and the thing about it is like there is you kind of have to get that acceptance of just understanding that doesn't make you less, right? Because you know that like, it's the same kind of conversation we've had before, where it's like you're too African to be American, too American to be African,
Right.
right? And that seems to be a theme, you know. And one of my good friends who I had on the show here, Nadia Sasso, did like a documentary about that, and it was like this mini documentary about that experience her in Sierra Leone, and that was that, you know, just being able to try to find ways to bond with other people, and it was very difficult because those developmental years, you spent those
Mhm.
developmental years doing something completely different than maybe what the rest of your mates back home were doing. But that doesn't necessarily make you, especially if you know you speak the language, you know the culture very well, you're aware of everything. I mean, I don't think it should. But speaking of the culture, before we, just a couple things before we wrap up, what are some things that, you know, I think distinguish, like, that are part of the culture that you think that stand out to you, that you value the most, that you want to, you know, continue to preserve? You know, the food is there and all those things are there too, but what are some important cultural values that you always like keep close to you, even as you navigated your American life here in Chicago and even going back home? What were some things that are like most important that help with your shaping of identity?
I think the respect or paying respect to those that paved the way for you, whether it be parents, your ancestors, or just anybody in general, that's very crucial. And we do that in various ways by making sure when you are in the public, you represent them in a respectful manner.
Yeah.
And because they pave a way for you, you also have the responsibility to do the same for others, either family members, community members, or anyone else. So that's really crucial for me. And I think language too. Uh,
Mm,
Kiswahili is one of like the most widely spoken African languages. We have over 200 million speakers. Of course, there's different dialects of Kiswahili, but speaking to what you were saying about us being here and our culture being kind of intertwined in the mainstream uh, society, like Kiswahili is basically all over Hollywood.
mm,
Lion King,
mhm,
hello, there's
mhm,
like a lot of Kiswahili in there. Mufasa, there's
mhm.
Kiswahili in there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kwanzaa,
Mhm.
all the principles are in Kiswahili. So even like taking kind of back the narrative, because I don't think we get enough recognition for that. Um, so it's really crucial for us to stay connected to the language, because I think once you lose the language, it become very difficult to reconnect with even folks back at home. So language is very crucial to us. And another thing that's really important to me, I think also being connected to our community. Um, we support each other in so many ways through the good times and the bad times, even when people lose loved ones, like even calling them or saying, "Hey, I'm gonna make you some soup and come by." Like
Yeah.
we still do those things.
Yeah.
Just being part of the community and showing support and being that support that we were also shown when we first got here. So that goes back to whatever other people did for you, you're also going to do for other individuals as well. It's very crucial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is what is some lighter questions? What are some what's your favorite food from home?
I like sambusas.
Okay, you gotta explain what is the sambusa for those who may not.
Sambusa is like, how do I explain it? It's almost like, I don't, it's almost like a bread that's filled with like vegetables. Sometimes it can be filled with meat,
Like a meat pie?
kind of like that,
A
like a
beef
little meat.
patty, as the Jamaicans like, the Caribbeans, is it like a beef patty type of thing or
I think so. And it's sometimes like a triangle. They're really good.
okay, okay.
I believe other cultures also have them outside of like African
Yeah.
countries. So those are really good. I like them. I also like chapati.
Okay.
It's like a pita bread type of sort of thing. It's really good. You can eat it during breakfast with tea or
Mm,
any time of the day that you want. And we have like barbecue meat too on a stick. We call it nyama choma, which
we
is
call it
really
suya. Yeah.
good. It's really good. Yeah, and we because Tanzania, we long time ago we were colonized by the Arabs, so we have a lot of like mixed culture, but like African, Arab, and Indian culture are intertwined. So it's a very very unique culture that we have.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
lot of our food are kind of like intertwined with like Indian food, Middle Eastern food, and so forth. But
Got
we're
it.
here.
Yeah, no, that is neat. And I got to experience some of that
Yeah.
Independence Day thing. But so, all right, to wrap up really quickly, what is, I mean, I know you touched on it a little bit. So just to kind of give it a little bit more grounding, um, when it's all said and done for you, like, what do you want your legacy to be and for your community? Like, what would you find great satisfaction in knowing that you've done something for your people? Like, what do you want that outcome to be?
That's a good question. I think for now, like one of our biggest focus, as I mentioned, Kiswahili is such like a major world language. We want to use that to create like a Kiswahili. There's already a Kiswahili Day, by
Mhm.
the way, that's internationally recognized,
Yes.
and we hope that we can create like a international Kiswahili Day here in the city of Chicago. And we hope to utilize that opportunity to also connect the Swahili speaking communities with the African American community
Mm,
to show that there's a lot more in common and to also highlight the impact that Kiswahili has on the Kwanzaa celebration, which is like an African American tradition. And then, through that, we hope to foster relationship, bring people close together, and also offer a platform for immigrant-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses to be able to like sell their products,
mm,
showcase their talent, whether that be I don't know, clothes making, hair products, authors. So that's like one of like the biggest thing we have right now, and we want to be remembered as people who kind of champion Kiswahili Day being intertwined into the Chicago culture and bring the gaps between like the African American community and African communities. So and everyone will be invited and I I want to see that happen sooner than later, but I know that takes time to like coordinate and bring together. But I that would if that would happen, that would be like a huge legacy, and we'll hope that it could turn into something bigger every year to even go like on maybe uh, on like Midwest to the point where it's like nationally recognized.
mm,
That'd be great. Just like because Kiswahili is like one of the most popular African, one of the most widely spoken African languages, and we don't think it gets enough recognition.
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Putting that on the platform. Well, I mean, I think that is something that I believe we're gonna make happen. So like trust is like I think I definitely feel that that is going to happen very soon and hopefully this decade, if not definitely the next. But yeah, so that, I've definitely taken more than enough of your time. But
Fine.
this was a blast. Thank you so much for jumping on the show and just telling us your story and sharing a bit about your culture. And I personally appreciate it because, like I said, I really want my listeners to be able to feel and learn a little bit more about the East African experiences and just kind of find some of the common ground because a lot of us we always are very West African dominated, and I think sometimes we tend to feel like we're the only voice that matters when talking about African experiences, and it's not. And I think that we live parallel lives. I always say that too, jokingly, but it's true. Even in listening to this, just finding a lot of the similarities, but there are also some differences and some uniquenesses. And I think you being able to even talk about just your experience being welcomed in the Black community is encouraging, and it kind of can help continue to show examples of positive outcomes for people who did come to America and find a home, in the African American community. And even though there are going to be some conversations, at least they happened, and they weren't they were happening. And so, the idea of being black, is something that is very interesting. That and it's very common among us, and I hope that others are able to kind of learn from what you shared, and as we go from there. But how can people, if people want to get in touch with you, like how do people, how do you want them to be able to reach you if they want to learn more about it or connect with TCA or whatever the case may be?
So we have a website, www.tca.org, that they could connect with us. We also have a Facebook, Tanzanian Community Association, that they could connect with us. And then through our website, you could see our other platforms that you're able to connect with us. So that's how you could stay in touch with us. And we also share things often. So typically on our social media platforms, that's how you
Yeah.
can connect with us.
All right. Well, yeah. So thank you so much, Ubi. I really appreciate you jumping on the show. Definitely hope to have you on again next time. We gotta have a larger, I because you were talking about your sister and how she grew up completely like, maybe
Mhm.
different. And I'd love to be able to hear a little bit more about that particular like range of experience for someone who kind of grew up completely like more Americanized than maybe others, just because being younger. So I'd love to be able to just continue to have more conversations with other people representing East Africa, and just continue to add more to the experiences and the storytelling. So thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll
Yeah.
talk to you next time.
All right. Thank you so much.